Hello students, in this video we are going to do the understanding and explanation reading of chapter 12, and that is your chapter, the Second World War. So we will be doing three portions of the chapter, three parts. We will be dividing the chapter into three parts. First is the causes, then the events or the course of the war, Second World War, and finally the consequences of the war. So here first, when we talk about the Second World War, it is basically after the First World War the Treaty of Versailles was signed, and after that only we can say that there was discontent within a few countries, like especially Germany and Italy. Italy was dissatisfied because being on the winning side it was not given any particular advantage, whereas Germany was considered the whole sole country responsible for the entire for the unrest. And that is why Germany required a lot of, there was a lot of economic crisis and all the things, problems going on in the economy. And then we see the rise of dictatorship and economy in the Germany, as well as Italian context. We see Mussolini and Hitler, they brought up one man show. They started one party rule, dictatorship, totalitarian government, and that is somewhere we can say that these countries got their will and power to once again fight against the world, to prove themselves better, or to regain their lost glory. So all these factors were the main things that made them go for the Second World War or prepare for another war. But there were several other factors which were responsible for the Second World War. We'll be doing all of them one by one. First is, I've already explained you, dissatisfaction with the Treaty of Versailles, and that is especially we are talking in point of view of Germany as well as Italy. Italy, as being on the winning side, was not happy with the partial attitude of the treaty. It was totally impartial, partial towards the other winning countries and against the Italian you can say, in terms of Italy. Then comes rise of fascism and Nazism. This can be taken as not the second point, but as the, you can say, concluding part of the first point only, because as Germany and Italy were not happy with the Treaty of Versailles, they even faced or suffered a lot because of the First World War, the consequences of it, and the, you can say, loss of manpower, resources, economy, everything was you can say dwindling. So at that time they required some strong rule, and so it made way for the leaders like Mussolini and Hitler to come up with their stronghold and control of the entire country. And that is how this particular Nazism and fascism came into being, which made these countries as one man show, and they were totally under the dictatorship. This dictatorship led to the goodwill, or to the, you can say, benefit of the state, not of the individual. And that is why they were all working to bring the lost glory of the nations, and they thought that it is better to extol war, or to go for war, to resolving all the problems whatever they have, and through war only they can show that they are more powerful than their neighboring countries. Next we see the policy of appeasement. So from here we'll start reading, because these are some slightly new points. So here it is. Appeasement refers to the policy of conciliating, that means having peace with the other governments or nations, and it meant accepting the hostile demands of the aggressive nation to gain peace. So that if any nation is being aggressive and they want to have a particular demand or policy to be fulfilled by the other neighboring country, so to avoid war, the other neighboring country might accept that particular policy totally, or they might accept it with some changes or with their own particular demands. This was known as the policy of appeasement. Britain and France followed the policy of appeasement towards dictatorial countries like Germany and Italy. So when fascism, Nazism came into being, and they knew these countries are under dictatorship, totalitarian government, they can anytime go for a war. At that time, to maintain peace, Britain and France accepted the policy of appeasement. So after this we can say they felt that the dictators had the real cause of grievance due to the humiliating Treaty of Versailles. And further, they wanted to check the rising tide of communism and Russian Bolshevism. So that is why Britain and France, they feared that Germany would divert towards Russian Bolshevism, and that would not be good for them. Therefore, they allowed Germany to rearm and remilitarize the Rhineland, and capture Austria and Czechoslovakia. So these countries were taken back by Germany, and they were given all the power to have their military order, standing army, and all the things to increase and prepare for the defense, because they felt that Russia might attack and create their particular communist rule over there. So that is how it was, to maintain peace, that Britain and France allowed Germany to do that, and they would not attack Germany. So that is how this particular thing gave way to Germany to make more and more arms and prepare itself for the Second World War. Then next was Japanese invasion of China. Japanese invasion of China was an important part for the Second World War, because Japanese policy of expansion was another cause, as its ambition rose higher after the Second World War and determined to dominate the Far East. They wanted to control even more colonies of the other European nations. They were capturing and including within their control all the foreign colonies of European nations. So China appealed to the League of Nations to declare sanction against Japan, because China did not wanted to have some particular step taken against this Japanese invasions. Britain and France, the leading members of the League, did not pay any attention. Japan joined the Berlin-Rome axis and formed the Berlin-Rome-Tokyo axis. Berlin-Rome means Berlin is Germany, Rome is Italy. So the dictatorial countries like Germany and Italy, they came in total alliance with Japan, Germany, to Japan, and to Italy. So that is how it became a real threat for the other nations, because these were the nations were now totally in the mood of dominating the world, having more colonies, and they were not hesitant to have war. So in 1933, Japan left the League of Nations and started occupying the British and American properties, that means their territories. And so it did not care about the sanctions that were given to it. Neither Britain and France paid any heed to it. They thought that it is all fine so far because they were not bothered. But now it was a threat to them, because Japan was capturing their territories as well. And Britain, France followed the policy of appeasement, thinking that the Japanese could be used to weaken China, because China was a huge nation and it could be a big threat to them. So they felt if Japan is fighting with China and capturing its property, so it will be easier. Japan will be a weaker nation then, and it will be easier to capture more territories of Japan than by Britain and France. So these were various thoughts, because of which Britain and France did not take any step for Japan initially, but later onwards Japan became a threat for all of them, and that gradually also led for the Second World War. Next, we see the failure of nations, League of Nations. League of Nations, just like a UN organization today, we had that League of Nations in 1920s, just after the First World War, and the aim was to stop any further such kind of discontent or any particular dispute that might lead to the another such war, like a deadly war like this, that like the First World War. But when no attention was paid to it, or rather there were no big nations having any dominant role over here, rather even the nations, those who were included in the group, they were not at all bothered about the sanctions or about having any disputes being sorted out, because they felt whatever the sanctions the League will be passing to one disputing nation might sometime be passed towards them also. So they did not want to play any dominant role over there, and that is why their negligence or their you can say passive participation even led to the failure of League of Nations. Japan, Germany, Italy, they all broke most of the rules and most of the things that League of Nations were supposed to check and maintain. So they were all broken, and nobody said any particular thing, and the disputing countries or the countries, those which were breaking the rules, hardly paid any attention to the sanctions or checks that were passed towards against them. That is why the loose control of League of Nations motivated or encouraged these nations to do even further whatever they wish to do, to have more of their might and power displayed, and to even go out open for wars. So that is something we can say was an important role of League of Nations. Failure was an important thing that led to or encouraged the war situation or war scenario. Lastly, we have the Hitler's invasion of Poland. That became an immediate cause. For every particular incident, big incident we have seen, there has to be some spark to lit the fire, and that is why we call such immediate causes as the important, very important cause for the fire, for the movement or event or war, because Till then the movement remains dormant, but with this particular one particular reason, the entire fire bursts out, and that is the same thing happens over here. It was Hitler invaded Poland in September 1939. They marched towards Poland and they wanted to have the territory of Poland under their control. By the Treaty of Versailles, Germany was divided into two parts in order to give a you can say land routes to Poland, and that particular till the sea, and that was known as the Danzig corridor. So Danzig was also given to Poland, and Germany wanted to regain its lost territory because earlier Danzig was under its control. The city of Danzig was inhabited mainly by the Germans, and by occupying Danzig corridor, Germany could connect with the East Prussians, that means their own people. Germany signed a non-aggression pact with Russia in August 1939. Poland was accused of committing atrocities against the Germans living over there. But on September 1, 1939, the German armies marched into Poland, although they had signed a non-aggressive pact, but they broke it and they went over there. France and Britain gave an ultimatum to Germany that if they attack Poland, then it will be tough on them. They might even attack them. But in reply, Germany attacked France on September 3, just as the previous World War scenario. The same thing happened. At that time, it was Austria-Hungarian and Serbia involved because of the Archduke Francis Ferdinand's assassination. This time it was the Danzig corridor, because of which Germany attacked Poland, and as it was about to march and attack Poland, France and Britain threatened them, and as a result Germany attacked France on 3rd of September. Britain and France together declared a war on Germany. Thus the invasion of Poland marked the beginning of the Second World War. And after this, we can say the German armies completed the conquest of Poland in less than 3 weeks, and as to ensure that no aid reached Poland, so that before anything happens, they were able to win back the Danzig corridor, so that nobody can stop them from doing it. And in spite of the declaration of war, there was little actual fighting for many months. Therefore, the war during this period from September 1939 to April 1940 was dormant. It might be called as the initial part of the First World War, but during these months, for months together, hardly there was any war because Germany had already taken it. They attacked France, Germany, and stopped them. It was a situation of a lot of unrest, but still there was no particular proper fighting going on the battlefields. That is why this was the dormant phase of the Second World War. But initially we can say, but ultimately we can say that World War started from here only, because this particular battle, or this particular marching and invasion, was the main reason why these nations had started fighting and were about to fight even further. Then we see the spread of the war, or the events of the war. So we will be doing various events of the war. First of all, we will be doing it in points. So there are several points that we'll be doing. I'll be reading out to them, reading out all of them to you. You can see those points in your books and read them accordingly. I'll be reading out the points, the events of and the course of the war. First of all, one country after another got involved in the war, like Switzerland, Sweden, Spain, Portugal, and Turkey remained neutral, but rest all the other powers, all the other nations of the European nations were all involved in the war. Italy, Germany, and Japan formed an alliance, and this alliance was called as the Axis power. Don't make it as triple alliance or triple intent. That was in the First World War. In the Second World War, it was Germany, Italy, and Japan together, and this was called Axis power. Their opponents were the Allied powers. Just like previous time, it was triple alliance and triple intent. This time that alliance वाले जो countries थे, they changed and they became Axis power. And the other power जो triple intent थी, they became the Allied powers, led by Britain, USA, and France. This time it was not Russia with Britain and France, but it was USA, which was there with Russia and France. Next we see it was in the beginning Russia was on the side of Germany, but later it also joined the Allies. That is why we see earlier it was not with Britain and France, but later onwards it joined the side of the Britain alliance, we can say. Northern wars were Luxembourg, Norway, Holland, Denmark, they all surrendered. The English army escaped with difficulty from the port of Dunkirk. Germany occupied many of its lost territories from France, and they all surrendered. The government here was asked to cooperate with the Germans. Later onwards, we see by this particular feature, we can say that it was in July 1940, it saw German aeroplanes bombarding English ports. That means the port cities of Britain, factories and populated places over there in Britain. Later onwards, Winston Churchill inspired the British to keep on fighting and counter bombarding the German areas. That all started, and because of this bombarding, we can say a proper war in the air started. That means the German planes and the British planes. Next, we see British General Montgomery defeated the German General Rommel, who had been sent to back up the Italians in Africa. This dashed Mussolini's hopes of occupying large parts of North Africa because they were defeated. Later onwards, Hitler conquered Greece, Crete, and Yugoslavia. They brought them under his control, under the Nazism, or we can say under Germans. Japan attacked American port Pearl Harbor in December 1941. Battleships were sunk. The US declared war and joined the Allies. So it was now US was always on the side of Britain and France, but now it actively took part in the war because it had warned Japan not to involve it. But when Japan attacked it, it was now they wanted to take revenge, or they wanted to avenge this particular attack, and they got into war from the side of the Allies against the Axis power. Obviously Germany they were never friends with, and now they were even enemies to the Japan. Next, we see Japan conquered many other Asian countries which were under British rule, like the Malaya, Singapore, Philippines, Hong Kong, Bali. It even conquered Rangoon, which is now called as Myanmar or Burma, and started towards northern eastern frontier of India. This is the time we have read in the history of India about Subhash Chandra Bose and all those things. Shaheed and Swaraj Islands were given. So that was all China helping the Indians to get out of British, and they wanted to conquer the Indian territory of Britain also. Later onwards, we see the Italian forces in Tunisia surrendered after fierce fighting. Hitler attacked Russia, reaching close to Moscow, but Hitler's campaign against Russia failed, and this was a great cause of the final failure of Germany also, because now as they were about to reach Moscow, they were defeated and sent back, and after that they were never able to recover during the Second World War. Air raids on Germany and its bases led to freedom of France from German occupations. Soon Germany was forced to vacate Holland, Belgium, and with Russia attacking Germany from the east, Germany had to fight two fronts at the same time. And that is how it was very easy for the opposing countries, Russia and the other, France and Britain, to defeat Germany, because they were fighting from both the fronts, from both the sides. When Berlin itself faced defeat, Hitler committed suicide, and that was German surrendered on 7th of May in 1945. The Allies issued an ultimatum to Japan to surrender or to face destruction. The Allies means especially Britain, France and the USA. So they were warning Japan to surrender, otherwise they will have to face the consequences. Japan was not ready to surrender and was ready to see what can come to their way. And as a result, we see Japan was unwilling to surrender. Atom bombs were dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and because of these atomic explosions, Japan finally surrendered on 15th of August 1945, having suffered great destruction. And this was the end of the war, because after Germany's defeat, first of all it was Italy which was devastated because it was not able to win most of the places and finally defeated. Then it was Germany, and lastly it was Japan which had to surrender. And that is why the triple Axis power, all three of them were defeated and had to surrender, and the war came to an end with this particular event. So these were the various events, we can say, which took place all over the world. The world we are talking about is basically the European and the Asian fronts, and a little bit of USA being involved in it, and African territories were just because they were invaded by the other countries to expand their territories. So that is why we don't mention much about Africa and America, because and even the Asian countries, other countries. But the main countries we are talking about, those which were actively involved in the war, and they were the ones who were even trying to expand their territories in different parts also. So these were the reasons why we can say that Second World War was again at the level, a world level or international level, where not two nations but several nations were fighting at the same, not particular same year, but same span of time. Within that span of 6 7 years, they kept on fighting. The war went on from 1939 to 1945. So these 6 7 years were all into war. Next, we see the result of the war. What was the result of the war? We'll see. It was like unimaginable sufferings and destruction that was led because of this war. Millions lost their lives and millions of them were wounded. Even after the war, for years, they were all having those scars of the war. Vast lands were left in ruins because they were totally wastelands because of the dead bodies, the blood, the gunpowder, the explosions, everything, and it was huge. Grounds were totally ruined. The plight of the civilians and the armed forces was terrible. Next, we see the Allies defeated the dictators. Both the Nazis and the fascist dictators lost the battles, they died, they committed suicide. Germany was occupied by the Allies and it was divided into four zones taken by Britain, France, USA, and Russia. Later onwards, Britain, France, and USA part was given back, rejoined. Only the Russian part remained separate from it, and it was named as the East Germany. The Second World War led to the lowering of the status of France and Britain also. Earlier they were the world leaders, but now after the First World War, obviously USA had got that power, but now it was USA and USSR which became the two world leaders, the superpowers, and Britain and France was nowhere in comparison to them, because these two nations, USA and USSR, became the you can say totally best of the superpowers with equipped with arms and ammunitions. And most important thing was, earlier these two nations were together, but later onwards, after the end, by the end of the Second World War, USA and USSR had a tough rivalry to prove themselves as the better than the other and the superpower. But ultimately we see that USA did win this particular contest also, and it became the first world superpower after the Second World War. As a need for an effective international organization, there was inauguration of a world peace organization, and that was the United Nations Organization. And they decided to make it work even better, because they had already seen what the failure of League of Nations led to, and that is why they did not want this organization to become a failure and lead to another such war, because this time it would have been even more deadlier. So therefore in 1945 the United Nations Organization was formed. Serious attempts towards disarmament and use of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes were made, and later onwards it led to the rise of communism in many of the countries also. So these were all the repercussions, results, and consequences of the Second World War in nearly all the countries which took part in this. And UN organization was a thanksgiving, or was a very was by far the best thing that came out of the Second World War. And that was not only for the nations which fought the war, but for all the other nations also, those who wanted peace,